Video game emulation is awesome. Picture this, it's 2008 and my mom hands me my Nintendo DS, but something is different. Being 4 years old, I failed to notice the strange new cartridge inside of the console. Well, after booting it up, let's just say my little mind was blown. New Super Mario Bros., Legend of Zelda, Ace Attorney, you name it, I had it. With the power of the internet, I was no longer limited to the few games we could afford now and then. Eventually, I learned of emulating games on your phone, your Wii, and even a computer. Not once did it cross my mind that I was somehow playing these games for free. I mean, they always just seem to appear every so often, and what kid would complain about that? Of course, I eventually started learning the true nature of emulation. Letters in the mail from my ISP telling me to stop torrenting games, viruses on my computer, ROM websites being taken down left and right. To be honest, I had to stop. But well, you read the title of this video. Here's what brought me back. I gotta be honest, without emulation, I don't think I would have been nearly as proficient in life as I turned out to be. I mean, not to brag, but I was playing games with this on it before I was even in kindergarten. In all seriousness though, I was able to get pretty much ahead of everyone academically my age because of what I learned in games like Ace Attorney and Professor Layton. While little Timmy was playing with Legos, I was busy trying to solve puzzles and murder mysteries. Of course though, how could I not enjoy some of the more fun games like Pokemon or New Super Mario Bros. Couldn't tell you how many hours I had just playing those mini games. I don't want to turn this video into a DS retrospective or anything, but I just thought it was important to acknowledge how impactful this gateway into emulation was for me. That aside, the next biggest era for me was emulating GBA games as a kid. For some reason, the Game Boy Advance was super easy for me to emulate, and I managed to figure it out on my phone without any help from my parents. The credits really go out to the developers of the Visual Boy Advance emulator though, making these classic games so accessible to new generations. Well, you might think I played a bunch of games from this time. I actually only downloaded like 3. Pokemon Fire Red, The Legend of Zelda Minish Cap, and Mario & Luigi's Superstar Saga. I mean, to be fair, these were probably the best of the best mainline Nintendo games on the console, but specifically, Pokemon Fire Red was just the perfect game for me. Incredibly easy to play anywhere, super replayable, and overall just a fun experience. Throughout all of my academic life, I found myself playing this game anytime I've had to go through boring classes. I even did a full playthrough of this game with one of my friends in our senior calc class. The Wii emulation era of my life was also an interesting one. Basically, one day, my dad just brought in a huge hard drive, plugged it into my Wii, and said, have fun. Of course, he did a bunch of behind-the-scenes computer stuff to make it work, but hey, I was just glad to have more games. I had everything on there, man, from Super Mario Galaxy 2 all the way to Dora the Explorer. While I had a lot of games on there, for some reason the two that stand out the most for me are WWE 13 and Punch-Out. Remember how I was talking about how much games helped my intelligence? Well, there was a trade-off. Aside from playing around with friends outside every now and then, I was physically pretty much a joke for most of my childhood. I did a bit of karate every now and then, but never really to the point of sparring. WWE 13 was my first real experience of physicality, even though it was obviously virtual. I just thought it was so cool seeing a bunch of jacked dudes beating up each other. This was a similar feeling to when I played Punch-Out 2, but honestly, that game is actually just super good regardless. I mean, just as an aside, I thought this Switch would have been a perfect console for another Punch-Out, but I guess Nintendo didn't think so. Anyway, this all was just homebrew emulation though, which is a whole different rabbit hole, but I know the majority of people have actually emulated these Wii games on Dolphin instead. While slightly a less authentic experience, I had some of the best times playing GameCube and Wii games on PC. Namely, I love playing through Pikmin and Luigi's Mansion. After the Wii era, emulating modern games had started becoming more and more difficult. Even if there were emulators available, chances are you had to torrent games instead of just downloading them from a website like we do now. This was the era where I pretty much stopped emulating, although I will say it was during the time of OG Fortnite, so let's just say I was occupied anyway. When I did come back though, it was to play one of the best games that I had missed out on, Pokemon Black and White 2. Yes, I know this is a DS game, but for some reason, I just never got it. And wow, this game is amazing. Unfortunately for me, I lost my save right before the Elite Four, so now I'm just sad. In better news, around that time, I stumbled upon an actual download of Wind Waker HD from a website with no viruses or anything, so I figured, why not? Well, this ended up being one of the most fun experiences I've had emulating because the game ran absolutely amazing. And while Wind Waker HD was fun, the Wii U kinda sucked in terms of games that were actually worth emulating. Here's where things pretty much stopped for me. I mean, to be honest, the Switch had been great in terms of both new and retro ports, although I still don't know why Pokemon isn't on Nintendo Switch Online yet. Besides emulating games myself, I think I've probably watched much more of it instead. I mean, for a time, Mario 64 animations were some of the most popular videos around, not to mention all of the Super Mario World and Pokemon ROM hacks that people still play to this day. Speaking of which, one of the best emulators in my opinion is PokeMMO. Now, technically it's not marketed as that, but in my eyes, it's one of the most optimal ways to play the Pokemon games. Although it does lack some features from the originals, the experience of going through a Pokemon game alongside your friends is one of the coolest feelings in gaming. As fun as I had emulating games, there were also a fair share of moments that the games just didn't work. One of the funniest moments is when I tried emulating Link to the Past, but it was just a completely black screen with rain sounds. Obviously, this was the intro to the game, so I just thought it was a part of it, so I sat there for 30 minutes just trying to get through it until I eventually gave up, realizing it was a glitch. Another SNES game I struggled with was Super Mario RPG. I'd made it all the way to Booster Tower, and then the game just randomly trapped me somewhere I couldn't jump out of. Honestly, these kinda sound like creepypastas now that I remember it, but I guess the SNES was just hard to emulate back then. I remember playing through Wind Waker, and when I got to a certain part of the game, it would crash whenever I pressed up on the D-pad. While all of these moments sucked, the worst thing was actually when I would just lose a save out of nowhere. This would happen to me literally countless times, honestly, but the most heartbreaking had to be losing my Ocarina of Time save right after the Forest Temple. I was playing through the game for the very first time, and it was so fun, but one day I logged on and it was all gone. Now I've been telling stories about the games I've emulated so far, but not really how good the emulation is mechanically. I mean, first of all, save states are the greatest creation known to man. Sometimes in these old games, there's just one super hard part that you don't feel like restarting the whole level over. I think the best example of this can be found in Super Mario World and the ROM hacks of it. Another one of the best features in emulation is the fast forward button. I think my favorite use of it is in the Pokemon games, since it can get kind of annoying level grinding or dealing with random encounters. Oh, but how could I forget the most broken feature in any emulation software ever? The Nintendo Switch rewind feature. Now, I'm not sure if any other emulator has this, but let me tell you that without this, I would have not been able to beat Super Mario World as easily as I did. Some people do think it's a bit cheap to use, and yeah, it is, but hey, sometimes I just want to have a fun time and not always have to get back to where I was because I made one mistake. There are some other cool features in emulators like cheats and whatnot, but to be honest, all I want is the most optimal version of a game. Unfortunately for us, companies like Nintendo seem to not share this sentiment. In fact, it seems like they don't want us playing certain games at all. Admittedly, Nintendo Switch Online has allowed many dead games to resurface, but it still is very limited. Because of this, emulating games on a computer or other nefarious methods seem to be the best and sometimes only way to play our favorite games. While you might get in trouble for torrenting games, simply downloading them from the least shady website you can find is honestly common practice for many gamers. Now, am I being a little more loose with my words just because my channel is small? Yeah, probably, but hey, I'm just trying to bring light to something that got me into gaming, and it might do the same for others too. Realistically, I would have not been able to experience some of the greatest games of all time without emulation, so this is something I don't plan on stopping. The only times where anyone has really been legally prosecuted for emulating games is actually when they just distribute them or sell them illegally. If you're just some guy who downloaded Pokemon from 20 years ago, you'll be fine, bro. Of course, be cautious of viruses and breaking your game console because that could be much more costly than actually buying the game. Despite all this talk about emulation, I haven't really done much of it recently. I think with the recent shutting down of the 3DS eShop and whatnot, I'm really considering modding my 3DS and playing some of the classic games on there. It is kind of sad that Nintendo is shutting a bunch of the old servers down, but of course they are. I mean, they're super outdated and not even used that much anymore. I just wish that a service like Nintendo Switch Online was a little better in terms of its library of games. I feel like we should have the option to download popular GameCube and Wii games at least too, but nope, we get nothing unless it's a specific port, remaster, or remake. Oh, and you didn't hear this from me, but one of my friends was able to play Tears of the Kingdom for free on an emulator like the week it came out, so to this day I don't know how he got the game, but I certainly am jealous. Of course I don't condone any illegal activity, but do what you gotta do, man.